all stations. This is United States Coast Guard, St. Petersburg, Florida. The vessel, Summit Venture, 606 foot, has hit the Skyway Bridge. Any vessels in Tampa Bay area, Skyway vicinity, proceed and assist. There are reports of people in the water. Break. This is United States Coast Guard, St. Petersburg, Florida. Out.
Seeing what is happening in Baltimore today, you might be thinking about what happened in Tampa Bay 44 years ago. The Skyway Bridge collapsed. 35 people died that day. It was a freighter that rammed into the bridge in May of that year. Joining me right now to talk more about that day and what has happened since is Steve Yerrid. Steve is an attorney. And Steve, you represented the captain of the freighter that ran into the Skyway. I will say,
I did.
There's an instinctual response to figure out, well, who is to blame in situations like this? And 44 years ago, they tried to blame the captain, and your argument was, that's not fair. Why?
Well, I was a younger lawyer then, believe it or not, and I didn't realize it was a world stage. But the reason that the captain should not have been blamed is twofold. One, it was an unpredicted storm with hurricane force winds. The ship was basically blown off course. The tendency to blame someone, find someone at fault, was evident then because the pilot was crucified in the media and by the public. We held our powder back until we got to the trial, and we pointed out that the same problem that existed in 1980 existed this morning in the early hours. That is, the anchor piers on a cantilevered bridge were unprotected. So if you have bad weather, inclement weather, like the Skyway incident and the tragedy, 35 people died, and the lesson wasn't learned. This bridge in Baltimore was built in 1977. In 1980, the Skyway Bridge occurred. And we made it very clear at trial, ships can't go where there's no water. And fendering and proper islands of rock protecting the anchor piers, because if the anchor piers go, the whole superstructure goes. You see the video. I mean, it happens all the time when you are in construction. So you protect the supporting piers. In 1980, those weren't protected. John Lero was exonerated, much to the chagrin of everybody, I think. My mother only believed that, she's the only person who believed I could win, and I'm not sure she was convinced. But anyway, that's what happened, and what happened here is tragic, because if you look at the video, you also see right beside this beautiful Key Bridge, I've been over it many times, I went to Georgetown Law School. Right after that incident, they had the power lines, and you see the power lines are on islands of concrete. They're protected. They're right alongside the bridge, so it's ironic that those structures are protected, but the anchor piers weren't. And sooner or later, someone's going to get around to blaming the folks that should have revised this bridge, made it safe, and operationally protected. So 44 years from the Skyway, we don't have a repeat performance. I don't know how many people died today. All unnecessary, very unnecessary.
But you're making the argument that this bridge that was built in 1977, there was a lesson from what happened in the Skyway just 3 years later that for 44 years has gone unlearned in Baltimore that may have contributed to what happened today.
Yeah, I don't want to really undersell the notion that we have real problems with bridges, with highways constructed in our country, because many of them are outdated. So whether it was a lack of funds, which I find difficult, if not incredibly hard to believe, or whether it was just a lack of due diligence, one thing we know for sure, this ship, a helmsman could have taken, this was a Singapore flag vessel, a helmsman could have taken the wrong order. Hard left, hard right. He makes a mistake, she makes a mistake, boom, tragedy. Weather could have come, not in this case, but it came here. That could have happened. More likely than not, flickering lights and darkness on the vessel before impact. In this case, it's called not a collision, but an elision. A vessel hitting a stationary object is an elision. But in this case, we know that the vessel went dark before the impact. Therefore, I would think, and NTSB and the Coast Guard, they always do their investigation. They say it takes years. Well, it wouldn't take years to figure this one out, because that looks like 95% certainty, mechanical failure. Nothing the pilot could have done. And that's going to be a very hard defense.
And it's clear in the video that you're watching right now, if you were to rewind about 20 seconds before that ship made contact with the bridge, the flickering lights and the loss of lights that Steve's talking about did happen. You do see that on the video. Here's something else I wanted to ask you about. Sure. You played a big role in a documentary that looked back on what happened with the Skyway. What did you learn from that, and what was the message that you wanted people who watched it to understand?
Two things. I learned when I tried to make the feature film in the mid-'80s, because we've been approached by a couple of hundred producers, actually, and I didn't want John to be portrayed as the drunk, gay, irresponsible, incompetent person that he was made out to be. John Lero, with the pilot, right, Captain John Lero. God rest his soul. He died of multiple sclerosis. I gave his eulogy 20 years after this, and it was he was a close friend, and he took that blame that he self-imposed to his grave. It was very unfortunate. But the bottom line was, John, he was a very complex person, but he said it all when he said, ships can't go where there's no water. He kept saying that over and over. And the reason was, 7 months prior to that Skyway Bridge collision, he'd had a mechanical failure on a ship called the Jonah Dan. He almost was able to stop it, but not quite, and it brushed up against one of the bridge supports. And he was credited. The headline was, back then we had a paper called the Tampa Times, "Quick action averts disaster." The headline, John Lero saved Skyway Bridge. 7 months later, the way it was played, John Lero hits bridge for second time. Lero, reckless, incompetent. So the trial was quite revealing in the facts, because the truth has a way of coming out.
That's Steve Yerrid. He's an attorney.
And the documentary, the feature film wasn't made because they wanted to make a deal in Hollywood. I don't make deals. I like the truth. So we made the documentary because we knew we could do it here locally. I hooked up with Frankie Vanderbilt, a very good businessman here, and he convinced me that the truth was important. We made the documentary. We gave the money largely to charity, but it was a big seller. It was on, I think, Prime Video and everything for rental or for sale. I didn't follow it much, but the premieres in Tampa both sold out.
Steve, thank you very much for your time again.
You're welcome,
Steve Yerrid. He is an attorney talking about, as he said, the eerie similarities between what happened today in Baltimore and what happened 44 years ago with the Skyway Bridge in Tampa Bay. By the way, we have a podcast about what happened with the Skyway up on BayNews9.com, and we are linking to it on our social media if you want to learn.
The young guy in there is me.
Very good.